You're listening to Widowed AF with
Rosie Gill-Moss
and Lucinda Boast.
We've invited some members of the world's most exclusive club to bravely share their stories.
Join us for some honest conversations about living a different life, the crushing lows, the surprising highs, and everything in between.
Please note this is a podcast about death. Carefully read the episode descriptions and be kind to yourself.
But for now, welcome to our podcast.
Let's begin. Hello and welcome back to Widowed AF. We are delighted to have you back with us, and we are also delighted to welcome to our podcast Liz Towner. Hello, Liz.
Hi there.
Thank you ever so much for coming on with us today. I'm just going to give our listeners a little bit of a rundown of your story. I won't go into too much detail because I'd like you to do that yourself. But your husband, he suffered from mental health issues, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Then in 2020, Steve did take his own life, and that left you with 3 children, did it? I know 2 of your boys were older, but that did leave you having to explain and support 3 children through this loss. So I wondered, Liz, if you are able to give us, in your own words, a sort of summary of your story, please.
Yeah, certainly. My husband and I'm 47 now, nearly turning 48. My husband was 45 when he died. He was just a year older than me. And we met as teenagers in our local village. So we went to the local school. So I was 17 when I met him and he was 18. So we were together for significantly a long time. And yes, we had 3 children. George, our eldest, who is at the moment about to turn 23. We have Charlie, who's just about to turn 21. And then we had a big gap. And then we had a younger son who is now 11, just turned 11. So yeah, got married, moved in together, both had our careers. I was a nurse. My husband worked in print, worked his way up through the print company to quite a fairly senior level, from starting off with no qualifications and no knowledge of print. He'd done quite well for himself. We never left Snodland. We've always stayed in Snodland. All my family here, or his family here. Lots of people that we went to school with are still here. So quite a small community in some respects. And yeah, life was fairly good, really. I wouldn't say it was perfect. Like, no one's life is ever perfect, but things were going pretty well. Always feeling quite blessed, really, that we had at that time, before my husband became ill, 2 healthy children and lots of supportive family and friends around us. And then things changed when my husband lost a best friend to cancer, and his best friend was fairly young and had 3 young children himself. And that had a real big impact on him. We heard that his friend had a terminal diagnosis. So obviously we were kind of prepared for what was going to happen. So that was quite difficult for Steve to cope with. I think Nigel was a friend that he felt very much he could confide in and have quite open conversations with, which I think for men is quite difficult. So as much as he had lots of friends he could talk to, I think Nigel was someone that he really had a strong connection with. So yeah, so Nigel sadly died. Around the same time, his company that he worked for in print, the whole company was told that they may be being made redundant. So not just himself, but everybody that he worked with, all the people that he'd known for 10, 15 years he'd been in that company, were all to a situation of redundancy. And Steve, being Steve, was very much cared about other people, was very concerned about not just himself, but how would other people manage, what were they going to do? And I think it was a huge loss for him, because I think, although he ultimately wasn't a very confident person, I think working in that company had given him a lot of confidence over the years, being so well known, and he was quite well regarded within the teams. So that then came about. So unfortunately, yes, he was made redundant. The whole company, that branch of the company was closed. And he was then thrust into the situation of trying to find another job that earned that level of money, but outside of print, because print was actually folding. There was a lot of problems with the print industry. My middle son at that time was about to go to secondary school. So there was potential for me to bring in more money. Obviously, with another child coming, that was sort of thrown up in the air again. So that's kind of the thing that culminated in his initial decline with his mental health, basically. And from that point onwards, his mental health deteriorated quite drastically. And then that declined year by year for the following 10 years. So over a very long period of time.
So that's a very long time to be battling with your mental health. Was he offered any support at this time? Medication? What was he offered?
So he went to his GP, and GP said, we'll put you on antidepressants. That was it.
As they do.
There was nothing else offered, just antidepressants. And he commenced antidepressants, I think, within the first year of his initial depression. And the antidepressants didn't seem to agree with him. He didn't like them. They did numb the feelings of depression, but they also numbed every feeling he had. So he felt, and he expressed very much that he felt like a zombie, that although he couldn't feel those lows, he also couldn't feel any highs at all. And that was the
I can relate. So I was put on antidepressants when Ben died, and I had previously taken for other issues. And I do relate to that, actually, that feeling of numbness. Whilst they can be very helpful in the short term
yeah.
and for a long-term depressive condition, I think sometimes they almost do more harm than good, don't they?
Yeah. I think for some people they are life-saving, and I've heard people that have gone on them and have had really positive experience of them. But I think in Steve's case, for a variety of reasons, he didn't do very well on them. So yeah, he was actually very different to what people talk about when they talk about men and say, oh, they don't reach out, they're not very good at accessing services. He was quite the opposite. In fact, he was more than happy to access counselling, any kind of support groups that were offered, any kind of medication that was offered. He was actually seeking support. But we were just finding between the two of us that there just wasn't really anything out there that was really right for him.
That's almost more heartbreaking, isn't it? That he clearly so desperately wanted to get better that he would try anything and everything that was available to him.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, so during this time, Liz, he did make attempts on his life, didn't he?
Yeah, he made a number of attempts on his life. It was almost a yearly occurrence that we were dealing with that situation. And they were very much cries for help, that he would always let me know what he was going to do or what he'd done. And we immediately got him help on every occasion. And on discussions after those occasions, when I would say to him, why did you do that? What did you want to be the outcome? And every time he would reiterate, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I'm in mental torture. And it just gives me a break. I just get a momentary break.
He sounds like such a kind, empathetic, sensitive soul.
was.
And
Yeah.
my friend's a mental health nurse, and she said that the majority of people that she sees that suffer the most with depression are kind and sensitive, and they want to feel better,
Yeah.
and it hurts them, and they feel huge amounts of shame.
They do, with the guilt they know they're inflicting on their family, and I
Yeah.
mean, ultimately, that's often what leads them to take that final step. So, Liz, he did ultimately take his own life, didn't
Yeah.
he? If you're able to just talk us through what happened in as much or as little detail as you like.
Yeah, absolutely. So towards the very end of probably the last year of Steve's life, things have become very difficult in terms of living with him. His mood swings and his behaviours were really quite difficult to live with, really. And they got progressively worse. And the mood swings were becoming very, very rapid. So he would go from being very, very happy, almost manically. You could, felt very uncomfortable. It wasn't oh, wow, he's really happy. You could feel that this was not a natural happy, to then being extremely down or extremely angry, or just a range of emotions. And they would flip minute by minute. It wasn't even day by day. It was becoming really frequent. And that was, quite hard. I think from my point of view, I was constantly on edge because I knew that these attempts were becoming a little bit more serious each time and they're a bit more frequent. So going to work and knowing that he was at home with the boys, going out to take the dog for a walk, anything I did basically created a lot of anxiety for me because I wasn't sure what I was going to come home to. And obviously I wanted to be around as much as possible to make sure if anything did ever happen, that I was always here to make sure everybody was as safe as I could. So that started to take its toll on my mental health. And although I wouldn't say I had depression, I think I was highly hypervigilant and exhausted from living on my nerves, really.
The cortisone levels in your body must have been through the roof. The constant fight or flight.
Yes. And that's, and now I've had counselling subsequent to that. And I look back and I realise that was going on for such a long period of time. So that really was going on for 10 years. And yes, it got worse towards the end. But for 10 years, I was in constant fear that, that he would leave quite suddenly or that something pretty catastrophic was going to happen. And we were dealing with catastrophic instances, coming out of the blue quite frequently. So, yeah, and I would say the last two, I think he died about 6 weeks after we separated. So I made a decision to separate from Steve. He was, fortunately, in some ways for me, very much in agreement with that. Also felt that we needed to protect the children and me. And we also felt that from his point of view, it might be better for him to not have the worry of us, to be able to be on his own, to focus on his physical health, mental health, and really kind of give this as an opportunity to start afresh. Because I think around us, certainly myself, he felt very guilty, and he said it was a constant reminder of feeling guilty. So, in a way I kind of felt, and he felt, that with me away from him constantly, that he might be able to focus on himself and stop feeling that, guilt that he felt. So it was a very amicable separation. It was a very sad separation because we still both said we very much loved each other still, but we needed to put the children really first. And I admitted by that point that I didn't think I could continue for my own health and my own mental health sake in supporting him. I was still supporting him in terms of we were in contact every day. I was still attending appointments with him. The boys were going down to see him. But unfortunately, the time he moved out, he bought himself a brand new caravan towards the coast, and lockdown happened. So suddenly COVID came. It was in April when he, February, March, end of March, he moved out, early April when he passed away. So he moved into the caravan site. He then realised that the caravan site itself was closed pretty much. There was no social club. There was nobody else really down there. People couldn't go down and visit him. He got down, there was no Wi-Fi connected. So he suddenly didn't have his phone, wasn't able to use his phone as much as he wanted. And so he was quite isolated down there. His company then furloughed him. So again, there was no going into work, no seeing people at work. So yeah, I think that definitely COVID had a massive impact on that isolation that he felt. He came up, my birthday's April the 3rd. He came up to see me on my birthday, stayed overnight here, saw the boys, took his youngest son back with him for an overnight stay at his caravan, went down that following day to pick Arthur up. I believe that would have been about the 5th of April, picked Arthur up from him, chatted to him. He seemed okay. He was a bit emotional at times about his situation, said that he missed us all, but seemed generally to be doing quite well, I thought. And then on the 7th, overnight, I think I'd spoken to the last on the 7th, and on the 8th in the morning, when I messaged him, there was no reply, and actually we could see that he hadn't been active on WhatsApp or Facebook or anywhere. So we all tried contacting him throughout the day with no success. And then my eldest son, who was 20 at the time, said, "I'm not happy with this. I want to go down and check on him." And I just had a gut feeling. I said, "Well, I'm coming with you." So we went down together, and sadly we found him. He passed away the previous night. So probably early hours of the 8th, he'd passed away, and we found him in the evening on the 8th. So he'd taken his own life, and he'd very definitely done it in a way that nobody was going to find him. So whereas all the other attempts there'd been a message, he definitely thought about it and wanted to be found and hadn't wanted to take his own life. But on this occasion, it would have been very definite that that's what he'd wanted to do. So quite traumatic, because it was my son who initially came across him. So yeah, so that was all a bit of a shock.
Oh, mate, I mean, I all the hair's gone up. I mean, just hearing you say that, the horror of it and the sadness, the desperation and the loss, for this man who so badly wanted to be helped, and there was just nothing to help him. And it's something that we are hearing more and more of, that this traditional treatments for these very, very persistent, deep depressions,
Yeah.
they're just not working.
No, definitely not.
Oh,
Definitely not. I mean, he
um,
had accessed counselling. And in the end, he was having weekly counselling through the NHS. Again, that seemed to be working. I think very, very at the very end, I mean, he'd only been diagnosed with generalised anxiety disorder, but I kept saying, I mean, I'm a nurse myself. I'd researched things, I'd looked things up, obviously, and was very proactive in trying to find solutions for his illness. And I came across borderline personality disorder and read a lot about it, and was actually quite taken aback by how much it sounded like my husband, and not how he'd been before his depression, but certainly how he had been the last 10 years. And so we'd actually gone to see a psychiatrist, which had taken us 10 years to actually see a psychiatrist. At no point previous had we ever got to the level of a psychiatrist. And I went to an appointment with Steve a few days before he took his life. And he said, "I think potentially you have something called borderline personality disorder. I would like to assess you for that. And we will call you to make an assessment." Stephen and I had a discussion about that afterwards. He was very upset about it. He felt that meant there was no cure, whereas he felt if he had bipolar, there might be a medication. If he had a certain other kind of any other illness, that there might be a treatment. But I think he felt that with that as a personality disorder, when we talked about what that would mean, and that would be intensive therapy, he's actually said to me, I'm hanging on by a thread and that I can't face that.
It
No.
sounds uh, that definitive moment in his illness
Yeah,
up until he hadn't had a name for it. You know, depression is something that is lots of people suffer depression, don't
yeah,
they? And generalised
absolutely.
depression. But borderline personality disorder, whilst it's also really common, more common than you'd think, it's a scary diagnosis for him, isn't it?
Yes.
And the thought that there may not be a cure and he may have to live like this is, you can almost feel how unbearable that must have felt for him, to make that choice when he so clearly loved you and your boys.
Yeah.
I'm hearing real similarities to almost sort of end of life care in terminal ill patients with cancer or dementia. How you shift very much not from being their wife or their partner, but into being their carer. And I sort of hear that where you talk about him moving out, in that that separation needed to happen because you had essentially become a carer and a housemate rather than a wife. I do always ask people with children to try and sort of give me a little bit of an idea of how it impacted on the boys. I know that your older two were technically legally adults, but obviously they were still very, very young to lose their father. How were they in the early days? How are they now?
I think again, COVID as well, again, probably had quite a major impact because we were into the first lockdown at that point. So from the moment we found their dad and came home, we couldn't actually access anybody. We couldn't have our friends, family, we were stuck.
Oh, the isolation of that.
COVID was a horrible time for people's mental health, wasn't it? Clearly.
And then to be grieving somebody and
You can't
presumably,
even hold them, it's horrible.
were you able to have a funeral?
Yes, we had a funeral, but it was only 15 people. And even with that, we technically hadn't been able to invite anybody back afterwards. And in the funeral, we had to sit in separate sections. So his mum and stepdad were one place, his dad and his dad's partner were another place. So we all had to keep very separate from each other within the actual service as well. I mean, we did kind of break the rules a bit. We said to people to come back. We went in our garden. I'd done some things.
Won't report you.
Yeah, we've got a little man cave down there with a bar and a fridge, and we just sat round at a table socially distanced because I just felt I couldn't do that. I couldn't just walk away from the church and just walk away from people at that point. So yeah, the funeral was difficult. There were pros to that, if I'm honest. I also felt that I was relieved that there wasn't a huge, because there would have been a huge amount of people attend. And
Almost becomes almost a circus, doesn't it? There's
yeah,
so much, yeah, it can take over.
definitely. I mean, one of the things that was really touching was that because he did have so many friends and family and people that loved him so much and that were obviously really sad over what happened, they got together and they organised that they were all out in the streets. So they lined the streets when we left the house, which was extremely emotional.
Oh,
And they
oh,
basically
yes, that's
tore our
amazing.
car out of the village by everybody sort of, being on the sides of the road, socially distanced from each other. But it was a huge amount of people, which was amazing and yeah, extremely moving.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously it's not, but you know what I
I
mean?
know.
So you all have an involvement with a charity, don't you, that's local to you called the Men's Mind Project. Was that available to Steve before he died, or is it something that you've come across since?
Yeah, no, it was a very small charity when I first discovered it, and it was being advertised locally within Snodland as a chap called Tom Perry, who had set up a men's group solely for men, exclusively for men, to come together at a local venue and just talk about their mental health. He'd had his own struggles with mental health and had felt that there wasn't enough out there to support men in dealing with their feelings and having that opportunity to openly talk about their feelings. And he set up this charity which has gone from strength to strength. It's getting bigger and bigger and doing really, really well. And I heard about it and I remember thinking, actually, with all the other services that we were offered that didn't really suit Steve, I genuinely think that would have been something that he would have gained a lot from. Something that's very informal and no stigma attached to it, just turning up, talking about his week and offloading and finding out that other people had the same struggles that he had. So it really resonated with me as a charity. So I contacted Tom, explained my story and just, said to him if there's anything I can do to support really. And I've been involved in sponsored walks. We've raised money. Steve had a celebration of his life and we did it about a year after he passed away because obviously we couldn't do anything in lockdown. And we raised money from that. go towards the Men's Mind project, and I keep a close eye on it and support it where I can. So yeah, so that was something I felt that we could do positive to come out of what had happened.
I like it when people say things like this because it is, isn't it? It's the absolute worst thing in the world has happened to you and to your family. And then to be prepared to go out and try and save other people from experiencing it, which is essentially what you're doing in your
Yeah.
own way. I think that speaks volumes about strength of character and also this kind of determination, which, you know, in a small way is what we're trying to do here, which is for something positive to come out of something awful.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you just repeat that cycle of awful, don't you? Liz, what does life look like to you now?
Um, it's strange. I think from the moment that Steve died, there was a real sense of calm, although there was utter shock, horror. He was a big, larger than life person in terms of his personality, and within our family, he played a big part in, you know, either all the highs or the lows that he had. You very much knew he was here at all times. He was a big character, and I think with him not there, I think certainly for the first few months, I really struggled with that lack of what do I do, you know, because he'd been such a focus of everything, you know, all my feelings, all of my energy was placed into coping with him and dealing with him and managing crisis and managing the boys after crisis. And I think that was really strange because it almost felt as though it was a drug that you were missing. And it was like coming off of this drug, of this adrenaline that you were used to dealing with. And I would say that that's still to a certain extent there. I think I still now, you know, almost am waiting, quietly waiting in the back of my mind for the next crisis to happen, even though there hasn't been a crisis, you know, really since he passed away.
I think that's quite often with trauma, like what the trauma that you have experienced. And I know that Lou and I both have that feeling of waiting for the hammer to drop.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like I live under a slight cloud of fear all the
Mm.
time. And it's something that I try very hard to work on myself because I don't want to live in fear.
No.
But it leaves you damaged. It does.
I think it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because equally, you feel as though, and I know other people that I've spoken to that have lost someone feel the same, that you feel as though a veil has been lifted over the veneer of life, you know, all the superficial things that maybe are very important to other people or that are important, or maybe were important to yourself before this happened, suddenly become so unimportant and so trivial. And that in some ways can isolate you from other people because I think then you find that when other people are having these conversations around you, you kind of feel like it's not deep enough, you know, it's not something that you really want to talk about or think about. And that can actually change some of your friendships and some of your relationships with other people because they haven't experienced that trauma that you've gone through and they don't understand.
True. Your
Yeah.
tolerance for small talk and chit chat
Yeah.
becomes really low, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But
I've even said to all mums now, don't be expecting me to talk about the weather. Like you either get it all or you get nothing. How did people react when Steve died? Because suicide still carries with it such a stigma and people don't like to talk about it. They want to kind of pretend it's not happening. So, you know, things like when you went back on the school run, how did people react to you?
Uh, I think any kind of loss for other people is difficult. I mean, I myself, I work in a hospice, so I work with grief and work with families that are dealing with it. So I understand the concept from other people of being very fearful of saying the wrong thing. And I think I've had other people that have lost people and said, "Oh, it was awful. People crossed the street and people didn't talk to you." And I think, and yes, that kind of happens, but I don't have any animosity about that. I totally understand that. I totally feel that actually that comes from a really good place, that those people are so frightened of saying the wrong thing in their compassion that they're going to cause upset. So although it can feel like people are ignoring you, I genuinely feel that those people just don't know what to say. So I think that's hard with any situation. But I think, yes, the whole fact that it's suicide adds a whole new layer to that of not knowing what the right thing is to say or more what is the wrong thing to say. So I think on the whole, we were really, really lucky. We had some amazing family and friends around us. My sons in particular had some amazing friends that supported them, that supported all of us actually. And we really saw the best of a lot of people. And considering we were in lockdown, we had some gestures of kindness from people that were just so emotional to receive. And everybody absolutely did their absolute best to try and let us know that they were thinking of us, even if they couldn't actively see us. And, you know, that was great. I think yes, there was probably an avoidance of talking about it. I think people would say, you know, "I'm very sorry about what happened," and then that would be it, you know, if anything was said at all. And I think that's probably hard for us. I think maybe probably one of the hardest things I felt was because we were in lockdown, we didn't see people for so long. A year on, and I'm walking, I might walk down to my local village and I will see someone that I hadn't seen since it happened. And obviously, the first thing on their mind is, oh my gosh, there's Liz. And that's the first thing they think of. I'm not thinking of it at that moment. I'm a year on, I'm walking down the village, probably in a fairly good place in my head. And then you see that person see you instantly see their face, and then they will do that very sympathetic voice. How are you?
The head
How are you
tilt.
doing? Yeah. And then you're almost
Liz,
like,
go back there.
I know.
Sorry.
You feel like you've then got to play a part, because then you feel like you've got to look sad, because, it would be wrong for me to say, oh, yeah, I'm actually okay today, because that's the first time I've seen that person. So you then have to almost go into that acting role of, yeah, it's been really hard. And, then you answer all those questions and then you kind of walk on a little bit further and think, oh, now I feel quite sad. And that person, all they wanted to do was express their concern. And it's lovely. But yeah, I think lockdown made that, delayed everything. It delayed those conversations with people. It delayed those first meets with people, and even those first experiences of all the things that you do after that person has died, going out for the first time with friends, going out for the first time with friends and their partners. We couldn't do any of that for a good couple of years, really, because we were in and out of the lockdowns. So all of those
Yeah,
things were stretched out.
it's actually a whole new aspect to loss, isn't it?
Yeah.
That a good friend of ours, actually, she lost her husband in lockdown and she wasn't able to have the funeral until quite a long time afterwards. And she felt the same way. She said, I was kind of getting to a good place. I was hauling myself back out of this hole.
Yeah.
And then I've been hurtled back into it again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's something that people just don't think about, do they?
No.
So, Liz, you were with George, your eldest son, when you found Steve, but obviously you then had to tell the other two boys. I'm assuming that because there was a precedent for him kind of making attempts on his life, that they were aware that he had mental illness and that this perhaps was a possibility. So I'd just be interested in whether you did kind of prepare them for this, and then maybe how you actually broke the news that their dad was gone.
I think the older boys, definitely. I mean, they were 12 and 10 when their dad had first become ill. And obviously they grew up with an awareness of dad's mental health. And, certainly in the latter years, we were very much a very close unit as a family. And the older boys were very much a part of some of those crisis interventions and some of the support that we offered their dad, but also how we were all supporting each other. Arthur, on the other hand, we protected obviously very much from the situation. And it was a big important thing for his dad as well, that we protected Arthur from not knowing a lot of the things that the older brothers obviously already knew. So Arthur was aware that his daddy had anxiety, and I talked to him about that and said, daddy gets very stressed about things, and it's normal to get stressed and it's normal to worry, but daddy has an illness that means he worries way more than other people, and he gets depressed, sad way more than other people. And so he had an awareness of that. I think for him it was a huge, because he was 8 years old. He was the last person to see his dad really and spend time with his dad. So I came home that night, didn't tell him. He was asleep in bed, fortunately. And then the next morning I did tell him, and I was honest that his dad had died by suicide.
Yeah.
I didn't tell him how his dad had died by suicide, because my mother protective head was, he doesn't need to know that. That's not something that, he should know about. So I didn't actually talk to him about how, although he did ask a number of times, he asked me. And I think it was a good month after it happened when he said to me, I really want to know, and had been telling me that he'd been having pretty bad nightmares about it. And in his descriptions of what the nightmares were about how he thought daddy had died were horrific. And actually I came away from that and thought, wow, I think if I told him the truth, that would be better than him thinking the worst. So I took some advice from that on a Facebook support group for widows from suicide, and put the question out there, how did you all manage that situation? And generally the advice back was, if they're asking the question, answer them in the most age appropriate way that you can. And I did have a very difficult conversation explaining to him how his dad had taken his life in the most simple and terms that I could think of to tell him. And I genuinely feel, looking at him as I told him that had been the right thing to do, I could see him visibly relax. And although it was a horrible thing to have to tell him, I think it definitely stopped the nightmares that he'd been having.
Yeah, we advocate, the honesty, and both of us did this, the scrolling the internet that night, should
Yeah.
we tell the truth? And for me, I didn't really know. And I guess you as well, Lou, you didn't know, but you had a little more information, and you had to have that very awkward conversation with Scarlett when she was of an age where it was appropriate, because of
I
course.
did. I actually, because my boss's husband at the time was a childhood psychologist, and he sort of impressed upon me the importance of being black and white with her and being honest and not painting a picture of her dad that was inaccurate. That he told lies, and it was my job to find an age appropriate way to explain it to her. But I was getting all sorts of unqualified advice from people like, family members, well-meaning people who would say, well, obviously you can't tell Scarlett that what are you going to say? Just tell her that he had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, she deserves more than that. She deserves to grow up and know the truth. And it's important that they can trust you too. Your relationship with the boys now is vital for them, isn't it? They need to be able to trust their mum.
One thing I picked up on as you spoke, Liz, was the fact that you differentiated between normal bouts of depression, low mood, anxiety when you were speaking to Arthur, because otherwise there's that kind of connotation that any low mood could lead to this. And actually, you're right, that it's very important that they are aware that, it is still, thankfully, it is unusual. It's far more frequent than any of us would like. But, many people suffer with depression. It doesn't always end in tragedy. I also picked up on the incredibly charitable way you spoke about how other people responded to you. And I think you made me second guess myself, actually, because I can be, bloody hell, they crossed the road to talk to me. And the way you said, actually, they are so frightened of saying the wrong thing that they say nothing. And I think that was I thought that was a very big-hearted way of describing it. I'd not thought of it like that. So thank you.
Mm.
Liz, what does life look like for you with the boys?
So for me, specifically, I'm still working where I worked. My role there has changed somewhat and things are going well with my career. I've met a new partner, which is still in its very early days. We've been together about 7 months now.
People react to that, Liz.
I've not had a lot of feedback. I think the people that know me knows that it was a big decision for me to make that step into the dating world again. That it was a real challenge for me because I had a lot of anxiety and fear around meeting someone and then worrying about what if they have some mental health issues. How would I cope with that? How would I feel about being in a relationship? Would I just be better off really to just dedicate myself to the boys and focus on them and just really just plod along as I am, because actually I wasn't overly unhappy on my own, as I thought. So yes, jumping into the dating world was scary to say the least. I met somebody before my current partner and was seeing somebody for a few months and that didn't work out. But that was very much a lesson learned and again, an experience that helped me kind of navigate the whole world of relationships, because I hadn't been with anyone. My husband, I was 17 when I met him. So suddenly being single as an adult had never happened to me.
I was just going to interject and say that I'm really pleased that you've allowed yourself to be loved and find love again, because particularly being hurt like you have and living under that cloud of so much fear, my God, don't you deserve a little happiness and love in your life? I'm really pleased that you have, because Liz, what a story. I feel quite emotional, and I'm not the one that lived through that. So I hope that you will be very kind to yourself and give yourself a pat on the back, because people don't talk like that about losing their partner. They certainly don't talk about like that as openly about suicide very often. And it's really important that we do. So Liz, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you so much, Liz. It really does mean a lot.
Thanks to both of you. It's been good talking about it.
Thank you for listening today. We'll be back with you soon for more from the front line of loss.
But for now, as you were.